Some of you can completely relate to this scripture tonight. If you would read it together with me. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. And I know I didn't give clear instruction just a moment ago. I said read that with me, and many of you chose to read it silently with me. We opted for reading not out loud. So would you read that out loud together with me? How many here have the gifted knowledge of reading? Okay, just a few of you. Maybe we need to start another class alongside ESL. Any readers in the room? Are you ready to read with me? How many know there's power in God's Word? Don't want you to miss it. Want you to engage. Want you to be a part of what's happening tonight. Want to be a doer of the Word, not just a hearer. I want to be a reader. I want to be a declarer. I want to take part in what's happening tonight. Anybody with me? I don't want to do this alone. I can do this alone all by. I've done it before in the boardroom over there. I preached some of the most powerful messages by myself upstairs. But I tell you, it's much funner, much better, much more productive when we do this together. Are you ready to do this with me? Have I challenged you? Have I encouraged you? Isaiah 40:31. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Anybody want to make it through this without fainting? Anybody want to make it to the other side strengthened and encouraged? Anybody want to make it through the portals of glory? Walk on streets of gold? I don't want to faint. I want to be a part of what God has in store. We're going to wait on God tonight. Turn to your neighbor and say, the waiting room. You may be seated. Nobody likes to wait, but we have got to do it. In traffic, in carpool lines, in holding patterns, in grocery stores, for the doctor, for our spouses, for babies, for children, for teenagers, for retirement, for jobs, for bosses, for sermons to be over, and for Jesus to return. We wait. One of the current adages of today, my kids tell me sometime, they'll be showing me something on YouTube, or they'll be showing me something they want me to see, and they'll say, Dad, watch this, and then they say, wait for it. Wait for it. In other words, don't get distracted because this is going to come sooner than you think. You got to be prepared. You're not. It's going to maybe catch you off guard. Wait for it. So often that little term right there, wait for it, is a part of the Christian walk that God challenges the church to do. Wait for it. Just wait for it. Wait for a moment. Don't get in too big of a hurry. And we need that instruction because we live in a day when there are a million other opportunities in a moment's notice that can come our way that we can amuse ourselves with if we don't like the waiting here and right now. But remember, this church was birthed in a waiting room. Luke 24:49, behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry ye in the city of Jerusalem until ye be endued with power from on high. And if we are truly apostolic, there are some things in our lives that can only be birthed in the waiting room of our lives. It was a little story that I read. Brother Martin Ballestero writes a blog, and this came across my Twitter feed, this little title, The Drama of the Waiting Room. Well, that piqued my interest. And so I clicked. And this story came into view, and I'd like to share it with you tonight. The waiting room was full of desperate people. Another shift change brought in a new face behind the desk, but that was the only thing different. An older woman sat by herself in a corner observing the actions of some of those around her. She even attempted to guess what had brought them to this place. A few were in so much pain that they couldn't stop the tears from running down their cheeks. Her heart went out to them. She knew the only help she could give them was words, and they needed much more than that. One of the newest additions in the waiting room was a young mom. She nervously paced back and forth. Her face seemed tortured and filled with anxiety. She showed no interest in sitting down. Her lips moved as she prayed silently while pacing the floor. And occasionally she would walk by the clipboard that held the sign-in sheet as if to see how close her name was from being called. She frowned every time she looked at it. When the attendant occasionally opened the door and picked up the clipboard to call the next name on the list, all conversation stopped. Every ear listened for the sound of their name. The wait seemed like forever. Some of the people in the room had dried blood on their clothes. A few had addictions. Many were diseased, and a number of them had been in an accident of some kind. One or two had limped in with the help of others, but most came alone. "What are you here for, my dear?" the older lady asked the young mom. "I have a sick baby that the doctors can't find a cure for," was her answer. Her face showed sign of deep worry and pain. "You poor dear. It hurts so bad to see our baby suffer," the grandmother said as she shook her gray head, feeling the pain of the young mom. The young mom turned to her and said, "Well, what are you waiting for?" "My husband," the grandmother said with a hopeful smile on her face. The young mother looked around the room again. Across the huge cross-section of people, she could see that most of them had been there for a while. Disturbed, she asked, "What is wrong with this place? Why does it take so long to get help here?" The grandma just smiled faintly and slightly shrugged her shoulders, and she turned and looked into the eyes of the young mom and said, "How long have you been waiting?" 18 months, 2 days, and 11 hours, she said, glancing at her watch. "How about you?" The grandmother continued, I've been here 36 years this November." "Oh, my word," the young mom said as she sat down. You've been waiting here more years than I have been alive. That's an unbelievably long time. Are you able to talk to the physician at all? Does he ever say anything to you?" She said, Oh, I talk to him every day. He's the best there is. And he tells me that he'll let me know as soon as he's finished." "What's wrong with your husband?" She said, 36 years ago, he backslid. God's working on him, so I'm just sitting in the waiting room until my husband can pray back through." And tears began to run down both of their faces. "My dear," the grandma said as she observed that no one was monitoring the check-in list, please bring me that clipboard over here for a minute. I want to show you something." So the young woman obediently brought the clipboard over to the grandmother and sat down beside her, and they both began to look at the list of names. The older woman began to flip the pages back, and she flipped them all the way back to the first page and then began to call out the random names with dates and times. Here on page 1, it shows that Abraham was promised a son. And he waited here in this room for 25 years before Isaac was born. On page 2, it shows that Joseph had to wait 20 years before his dreams came true. And he got to sit on the throne of Egypt. Here on page 3, Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness, part of the waiting room, just putting in time before God could use him. Let's flip ahead a few pages. Page 12 shows that David waited almost 15 years before he was anointed king and before he was allowed to ascend to the throne. Page 20 shows that there was some guy who waited 38 years in the pool of Siloam, that section of the waiting room, before he got his miracle. The young woman took the clipboard in her hand and leaned back in her chair while she read down the long list of names. According to this log, she said, not very many get discharged the same day that they come in. But the good news that I see here is that the doctor has an amazing success rate. I'm not really in love with the idea of waiting, but I don't plan to leave here until my baby gets well. The grandma slipped her arm around the young woman to comfort her, and at about that time, they looked up at the two signs hanging on the wall of the room. They read from Psalm 27, "Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, upon the Lord." That's the picture of so many of us in many of our situations. Truth be told, if we were to take the microphone down off the platform and stop among the pews and begin to ask people here tonight, are there prayers that you've prayed but have yet to be answered? Every single one of us could flip back in the logbook and say, here on this day, I logged in and asked God about this, but I'm still waiting for the answer to that prayer. That picture of us is also found in the book of Isaiah, chapter 30. You can read verse 15. It says, "For thus saith the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength." That God says that in the waiting, there is strength that comes from him. In waiting, there is an opportunity that we can't find anywhere else. And often God's response to our prayer for an immediate answer is that he says, hang on, wait, and I'll bring salvation. Pause, and in the quietness of that waiting room, confidence will be restored and strength will come. But so often we, like Israel, respond to that request from God, and God has to say, like he did to them, but you would not wait. But we won't. We don't want to wait. We want to manage things. We want to manipulate it. We want to get our hands in the mix and get working on it all by ourselves. When God said, if you'll just pause and wait, if you'll just trust me, I'm going to work in the middle of this mess. I'm going to turn it around. And in quietness and in confidence, you're going to find the strength that I want to bring you. So what happens when we don't? God said to Israel, verse 16, he said, but ye said, no, for we will flee upon horses, therefore shall ye flee, and we will ride upon the swift, therefore shall they that pursue you be swift. That's our response when God says wait. We say, I'm out of here. I'll wait for it. That's us. That's our generation. That's society. That's us in today. And God challenges us to wait. How many love waiting? There's a song that I sing. It's an absolute lie. I don't mind waiting. Don't mind waiting. Don't mind waiting on the Lord. Liar. You liar, Jack. I don't mind waiting. I don't mind waiting. Don't mind waiting on the Lord. If anyone heard me sing it, they'd be saying, Wrong. Wrong again. I do mind waiting, but I've got to tell myself. Sometimes I gotta preach to myself. I gotta talk myself into it. I'm not minding waiting. We don't like the waiting room. But God finishes that. If you were just to skip one verse and go to verse 18, it says, and therefore will the Lord wait, that he may be gracious unto you, and therefore will he be exalted, that he may have mercy upon you, for the Lord is a God of judgment. Blessed are all they that wait for him. And right there in that verse, we find that God is waiting to allow us the opportunity to wait on him. Sometimes God pauses his response. He could answer immediately. His arm's not slack. His promises are yea and amen. Everything that God said he would do, he will do, but he picks the timeline. And so sometimes God literally says, I'm going to wait simply so that you can wait on me. Do you see that in that verse? And therefore will the Lord wait, that he may be gracious unto you. Down at the bottom, blessed are all they that wait for him. That there is a blessing in waiting. And that is the last thing everybody in the room wanted to hear tonight in Bible study. There's a blessing in waiting. There is a blessing in waiting. Because confusion can happen in the waiting room. The uncertainty of the outcome can be unnerving and upsetting. It can just kind of distress us and distract us and get us turned around and off key and off tune and out of tilt. It was a few years ago. Kathy had been ill for a few days, maybe even closer to a week, and she said, I just really feel like we need to go down and see the doctor, and we knew that the deck was really busy. We had a 411 from someone up there that it was packed, and so we decided that we'd go down to the Oromocto Hospital. I had a few things to pick up, so I dropped Kathy off the door, and I said, I'm just going to run to Canadian Tire. I'll be back. So I went down to the Oromocto Canadian. That's a beautiful Canadian Tire store. Anybody say amen? All the guys say amen. It's just a beautiful store. There's a hunting section and a fishing section, and there's a great clearance section, FYI. There's a great section at the back with, damaged goods, just my kind of thing. Anyhow, Kathy knows that. So I'm picking a few things up at Canadian Tire. I really didn't plan on leaving her there indefinitely. I just didn't like the waiting room. So she called and she said, Jack, the doctor was in to see me, but I'd like you to be here for when she comes back. Can you come now? And I'm thinking, okay, saw the doctor. I said, okay. What did they say? And she said, why don't we discuss that when you get here? Well, that's going to get me out of Canadian Tire pretty quick, Throw everything back on the shelf, jump in the car, zoom back to the Oromocto Hospital. So they had her on a stretcher just outside in the hallway, and I'm thinking to myself, what could possibly be wrong? And so I get to Kathy, and she doesn't look like too unsettled. She looks worried, but she's not like coming undone or anything. And I said, well, what did they say? And she said, they said that I might be pregnant. Well, at that point, this wasn't like 10 years ago. This is just recently. I said, you better move over. I need to sit down. Please move over. I need the stretcher. I know you're not well, but I'm saying that the waiting room can be very confusing. Confusion. You can get unnerved in the waiting room. I was unnerved. The doctor came back and said, we think it's just a virus or whatever. I can't. Thank you. I don't know how to be that mad and that glad at someone in the same moment. I don't know. I just nodded. Thank you. Thank you. How long have you been practicing medicine? Anyhow, long story short, I hope that wasn't out of order. Was that okay? Kids are all out there. Kathy's out there. But the waiting room can be very distracting. No wonder it's hardwired into us to find shortcuts to speed up processes. Faster computers, larger random access memories, the world of information at our fingertips. We don't even have to type anymore. We just talk into our phones and it comes back with us with knowledgeable answers. Libraries are searched in moments and in instants. We can get the answer that we need, and we're so used to not having to wait. Faster feedback, faster cars, faster food. And God moves at his very deliberate, willful pace to complete the plan that he has for us. So don't be alarmed in the waiting room, because God is still in control. Waiting on the Lord may be one of the most difficult aspects of the Christian life. When Jesus promised that he would return, he instructed his followers to wait, and we read about that verse. They land in Jerusalem, and that's just kind of easier said than done. Pastor is the master of working while he waits. I have a hard time working when people are around. If the waiting room is full, then I Service New Brunswick, I end up meeting people, I make brand new friends at Service New Brunswick. Planes, I get to meet people, figure out where they're going. My favorite question on the plane is, are you going home or going away? Kind of hard not to answer that one. I'm going home. I'm going away. That's a great conversation. Try that sometime. Great conversation starter. Works for the bus. Works for the... Okay. But pastor is just kind of, he processes the time and he can get some work done. And it's hard for me if people are around, I'm talking and he just kind of makes use of that time so well. I'll end up daydreaming or conversing, and it's just not something that I'm very good at doing. Waiting with God, though, is the process of becoming what God wants us to be. And often the work that God is doing isn't the answer that we are waiting for. It's something that God is producing in us. The pearl of great price is often inside of us, and it starts with this sand of discontent or sand of disappointment, and God forms that in us, but we can't speed the process. It has to happen over time in the waiting room that God has us in. Waiting, biblical waiting, is not about passively waiting around for something to happen that will allow us to escape our troubles. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. It's not fatalistic resignation. It's not a way to evade unpleasant reality. Waiting is trusting that God is working while the answer is coming. That is the power of waiting. And no wonder God said strength comes while we wait. If we don't learn to wait on God, what happens is we, like Isaiah said, we get engaged in trying to make this happen on our own, and we wear ourselves out while God is saying, if you would just wait, if you'll just wait on me, if you'll just wait on me. I'm waiting because you haven't waited on me yet. I'm waiting on the answer because you haven't learned to pause. You're pressing on with your own agenda. You're pressing into your own plan. You're pressing into your own purpose. And God says, all I want you to do is wait, pray, and wait. Those who wait are those who work because they know that their work is not in vain. The farmer, he works and toils to get the seed in the soil, but then he has to wait. Have you ever planted grass seed? Isn't that the funnest thing in the whole world? Like, no wonder sod is such a powerful selling tool. Sod, you just kick it out and the lawn is done. It's beautiful. It's fast. Seed, on the other hand, is much cheaper, but it takes so much longer. You cast the seed out. You get the seed in the soil. You get watering it. You got to remember to water it every day. But if you're diligent and you wait, before long, it's like, you look at the ground and it looks normal, but if you've ever planted grass, this is what you do. Is it just me? Maybe I really have a problem with waiting. Maybe this goes deeper than just, I thought that was normal. Has anyone else ever done that? Okay, one, I get two. Okay, two people have planted grass and couldn't wait for it to come up. Okay, but waiting and trusting. Waiting is the confident, disciplined, expectant, active, and sometimes painful, clinging to God to do the work while we simply wait. We know that if we wait, we will reap the reward. And so we just learn to trust in him. And that is what happened in Acts 2. I'm concerned. I'm worried about us, church, because I'm convinced that if we were in the first century, and God called the 120 that are in this room and told us to go to Jerusalem and wait until we're endued with power from on high, how many of us would still be there in 1 week, in 2 weeks? How many of us would wait around for the promise to come from God? I think many of us would give up. I'll be right back. I'm heading to Canadian Tire. That's where many of us would be. We'd be going forward with our own agenda, our own plans. But God says, hang on. We need to learn to wait on God. What an old principle. But what a powerful plan that God has for us. We have got to learn to trust. Turn to your neighbor and say, I'm going to learn to wait on him. Waiting on the Lord requires patient trust. We live by the adage, don't just stand there, do something. And God often is saying to us, don't do something, stand there. Wait. Waiting means that we give God the benefit of the doubt. and that we trust that he knows what he's doing. Waiting is God's way of saying if we will trust him before we move forward. That trust is that patient trust that God is working even when we can't see him acting. Waiting on God reminds us that God's in control. Sometimes people ask, what do I do while I'm waiting? Good question. During those waiting times, take on the active role of watching. Watch and pray. Psalm 130, verse 5, I wait for the Lord. My soul doth wait, and his word do I hope. So we've got that. But then the psalmist went on. He said, my soul waiteth for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. I say more than they that watch for the morning. The discipline of watching and waiting. In biblical times, watchmen diligently guarded the city. They watched for enemies who might attack at night, and they waited for the sun to come up. They were alert. They were obedient. They were ready to respond when needed, when called upon. They sprang into action. But on the other hand, watchmen didn't make things happen. They didn't say, well, it's a pretty quiet night. Let's see if we can't get something stirred up around here. Let's create a problem. Okay, Jimmy, watchman number 2, I want you to go out and pretend to stage an attack on the city. And I'm going to cry 911. We're going to get everyone kind of ramped up about this. No. They just learn to watch and to wait. They're prepared to be a part of what's happening. They couldn't speed the process up of a dawning new day. They couldn't speed the process up of safety. They couldn't speed the process up of problem. They just had to wait. They knew the difference between their job and God's job. Waiting reminds us that we aren't in charge. We're the patient. We're in the waiting room. In the real issues of life, we're not just waiting around, we're waiting on God so that we can trust his timing, we can trust his wisdom. We're not in charge. Look at your neighbor and say, you're not in charge. Waiting reminds me that I am not God. You all know me. I love to fix things. I love to fix stuff. I want to weld it, glue it, tape it, duct tape it again, epoxy it. I enjoy that. I like that. But there's some things I can't fix. God has to fix it. And I've got to leave it up to him. I can go as far as I can. But often with what's happening in my life, with the prayers that I need answers to, with the things that I'm praying about, with what I am believing God for, I've just got to simply wait on God. You see, because when we wait on God, it allows him to do his work. If you ever walked through our foundation class, one of the first pages in the opening of that lesson, of that foundation class that we have available for anybody. If you've never been through our foundation course, I encourage you, approach me. Well, I'd love to teach it to you if you've never been through it. Whether you've been here for 50 years or 5 minutes, it's just a terrific Bible study. And in the beginning of it, it talks about our vision for Fredericton. And we helped, we sat down, Pastor and I, and we've dialogued and discussed and talked about what we believe that God has called us to here in Fredericton. And over the title of that page, it's just a simple title heading. It's Our Vision for Fredericton. And I can tell you that is a big vision. It's broad. It's greater than what we can do. And I some parts of me believe that was going to happen in the first 2 years that we were here. That we were going to completely see this vision come that we prayed about and asked God for. God put it in our hearts. God placed it in our mind. God gave us a vision of a campus that's multicultural, a campus that's multi-generational, a campus that it can't be contained on the 10 acres that we own. We had to buy more property because this doesn't hold the vision that God has for our church and our community. And I still believe that vision, even if it's taken longer than 2 years to see it come to pass. We can see it happening. We can see it growing. We can see it coming into completion. We can see elements and foundation parts of it growing and coming into being, but we haven't seen the fulfillment of it yet. But does that mean that the vision isn't real, isn't from God? I'm telling you it is. But we're waiting on him. God's timing is best. In the Old Testament book of Habakkuk, the prophet was asking similar questions about timing and plans and God's mind. And if you listen to the dialogue or read through it between him and God, in verse 1 of chapter 2, he says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am reproved. I'm going to wait on God. And the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tablets, that he may run that readeth it. And verse 3 goes on, it says, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and it shall not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. If we read in the Amplified, it may give us a bit of a better picture. The Amplified version says, I will stand guard at my guard post. I will station myself on the tower. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what answer I will give as his spokesperson when I'm reproved. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and engrave it plainly on clay tablets so that the one who reads it will run. Verse 3, for the vision is yet for an appointed future time. It hurries toward the goal of fulfillment. It will not fail, even though it delays. Wait patiently for it, because it will certainly come. It will not delay. And sometimes that's exactly where we are. We are waiting, but God is saying, wait patiently for it. It will certainly come. It will not delay. It's just had a long way to travel. It had a long distance to come. God's working. God is working. You know, there are testimonies in this room that could tell some new believer that it will come if you wait for it. The prayer's been prayed. The challenge is still there. But if you'll wait on God, he will bring the answer. It will come. It was during my high school graduation year that my dad walked away from God. I don't want to bring him any dishonor. I love my dad. I'm thankful for everything God's done in recent years. But that began probably one of the most challenging decade and a half of my life. My dad was Sunday school superintendent. He was a Bible study teacher, person of prayer, loved God, led us. But in that year, I don't know what happened. I don't even know all the ins, don't care to. I remember having a conversation with him, and he said, Jack, you know, I brought you and your sister up, and it was just an intentional, got cold in the spirit and walked from God. And I remember being so upset my first year of Bible college. It was River Street where the dorm was, and I would lay on the floor in the prayer room and pray. That God would save my dad. It was a decade waiting for God to deliver. And that season was very, very difficult. I watched my mom be faithful. I watched as our family polarized some in that season, and the enemy seemed to have a heyday. But I felt like God had talked to me that he would turn things around. It was 10 years following that my dad fell extremely ill, endocarditis. He didn't know what the problem was, and it's only after that, but it landed him in the hospital. Brother Dudley was there at the same time, fighting a cancer diagnosis. It was critical, to say the least, and in 2 open heart surgeries in 6 weeks, my dad seemed to be on the mend. Physically, that there was an option and a hope for him. But spiritually, I knew where he was. And that was part of the prayer in that season of his sickness, because God, I need you to save my dad. I don't know how many prayers I prayed. I don't know how many prayers my mom prayed. I don't know how many prayers Cheyenne prayed, or Jeff. I don't know about our church family, but I do know that we prayed. And I had held on to a promise that God had given me, that he would save my dad. But in those moments, I remember meeting with Dr. Forgy, the surgeon at the time, and he said, it was a long surgery. He said, if your dad makes it, we don't know how it's going to be on the other side of that. But we watched God work a miracle physically in his life. And I was very thankful for that. I watched God turn that situation around and physically turn him from being so ill and on. Actually, they brought him back with paddles. His heart had stopped, and he died on the table, and they brought him back. It was just, that's how bad the situation was. So I thank God in that season that he restored him physically. He was up and mobile and walking around with a heart pillow. This is going back to the same year that Justin was born, 16 years ago. And when Dad was well enough, Kathy and I were smart enough to schedule Justin's baby dedication in between 2 open heart surgeries for my dad, because the work that they had done in the first surgery, it was limited in what they were able to do. So in between the first surgery, in the following 6 weeks, they waited for the heart to strengthen so they could go back in and do another second surgery on him. So it was in that season of time where we planned baby dedication for Justin, and which gave my dad a great excuse and gave us a great excuse to get my dad in church. And when we did, I remember that Sunday morning, that we did the dedication, but pastor began to preach about the power of God and what God could do in a life and the power of the blood. And I watched as my dad walked down the aisle, repented, and turned his life back over to God. That was a long process. That was a decade of waiting for God to bring deliverance. And it came in such a rough, struggling way. But God brought the answer that we needed and turned my dad's life around physically and turned his life around spiritually. So I've come to tell someone tonight, there's strength in waiting on God. And you may not have the answer yet, but the promise is on its way. So don't give up in the meantime. The vision is yet for an appointed time. It hurries toward the goal of fulfillment. It will not fail, even though it delays. Wait patiently for it, because it will certainly come. It will not delay. God is working. Don't give up in the waiting. I feel the power of the Lord tonight. And I'm wondering if there isn't someone here that you know that you need God to work. If we wait on the Lord, our text said that he's going to renew our strength. He says that we'll mount up on wings like eagles, that we would run and not be weary, that we would walk and not faint. But all of that comes in that season when we are waiting on the Lord. Psalms 37 verse 9 says, for evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. There's power in waiting on God. I don't know why things went the way that they went in my life. I don't know. And that's just a chapter. God is still writing the rest of that book, I'm thanking God for everything that he's done in my dad's life and in my life. But I do believe that in some of that season, you can stand together with me. I'm finished. We can come to the music team. I do believe in that season that there were, when you're 19, you know it all. Sorry, most of our teens are out there. I don't know if we have any 19-year-olds, but the older I get, the less I know. So, very true. But I do know this, that there was some things in prayer that God taught me in that season that I didn't know anything about. About waiting on God and praying when the answer doesn't come, and then going back and praying again. And when the answer doesn't come, and weeks drag into months, and months turn into years, and years turn into decades. But the prayer is still prayed. And though it tarry, don't give up, because the answer is on the way. There's something that God does in the waiting room. If we don't give up, God's got a great plan. If we don't give up, God's got the answer. If we don't give up, healing's coming. If we don't give up, salvation's going to happen. If we don't give up, don't give up. Don't give up while we're in the waiting room. Don't walk out the back door. Don't just kind of throw your arms in the air, flip the clipboard across the room. That's not time to give up. The time to stay in it, to win it, is in that season in the waiting room. Don't give up. Would you pray together with me? It'd be all right if you just prayed with a neighbor. I don't know who is receiving this word tonight, but I've just come with the simple lesson. If you wait on the Lord, God's going to renew your strength. You're going to mount up with wings like eagles. You're going to run and not be weary. You're going to walk and not faint. Don't give up in the waiting room. Lord, I'm so thankful for your presence. I'm thankful for your faithfulness. And God, the trust that you bring in us because of how you've worked. God, not immediately. God, sometimes you just pause and you wait to give us the opportunity to wait. And in that waiting, God, in that season of pause, you prepare us. God, in that season of pause, you strengthen us. God, in that season of pause, you allow us to mount up on wings like eagles. The greatest and this, God, some of the greatest opportunity you bring us in is in that season of waiting. God, I thank you for the promise that's on its way. I thank you for the answer that you've already delivered that we haven't received yet. So, Lord, I pray that someone would hold on to hope tonight. I pray that someone would renew that waiting in their spirit. God, that they would renew the prayer that they forgot to pray because it's been such a long time. God, I ask that you would renew that hunger to see someone saved, someone touched, somebody delivered. God, I pray that you would renew that in someone tonight. Let that be a renewing. And God, that hope for what you have in store for us would live strong in our hearts tonight. We give you praise because you're an almighty God.